In February 1784, on Shikanoshima Island in northern Kyushu, Japan, a farmer repairing an irrigation ditch in a paddy field found a small gold object beneath a stone. Its seal face measured only about 2.35 centimeters square, and it weighed 108 grams. The top was shaped like a coiled snake, while the base bore 5 engraved characters that the farmer did not recognize. After the seal was sent to local officials, scholars in Fukuoka domain recognized the 5 characters as Chinese. Han Wei Nu Guo Wang, King of Na of Wa, under Han. They consulted Chinese texts and found a possible match in the book of the later Han. In AD 57, a polity the Chinese called the State of Na of Wa sent envoys to the Han dynasty, and Emperor Guangwu, Liu Shu, granted its ruler a seal and ribbon. Fukuoka scholars therefore concluded that the Shikanoshima find was probably the seal lost for more than 1,700 years. It later entered the collection of the Kuroda family, rulers of Fukuoka. Although forgery claims continued, studies of its dimensions, metal composition, manufacturing techniques, and Han seal system led the mainstream Japanese scholarly view to accept it as an authentic Han seal. In 1954, it was designated a national treasure under Japan's current cultural property system. In 1978, the Kuroda family donated it to Fukuoka City, and it is now held by the Fukuoka City Museum. Its importance in Japan did not fade after the war, as the country's economy and international standing rose. Instead, the seal entered Japanese school textbooks. Today, it is a major part of the museum's permanent exhibition and is described as a cultural property that tells how this nation was formed. The gold seal is an extremely precious historical document. It reveals Japan's diplomatic relations and position in East Asia in the 1st century AD, late Yayoi period, and is therefore crucial for understanding Japanese history. This raises a question. Why does a seal granted by a Chinese emperor occupy such an important place in Japan's earliest history? The Japanese archipelago of the 1st century AD should not be imagined as the later unified Japan. Chinese sources collectively called its inhabitants the Wa people. The Book of Han records that beyond Leilang Commandery, established by the Han Empire in the northern Korean peninsula, Wa people lived across the sea and were divided into more than 100 states. Small political communities under local rulers that formed alliances, fought, and traded with one another. Northern Kyushu, the part of the archipelago closest to the Korean peninsula, entered early into the maritime network linking Japan, Korea, and the Chinese mainland. Chinese bronze mirrors, iron tools, and other continental goods arrived along this route, while envoys could travel in the opposite direction through the peninsula to China. In AD 57, envoys from one northern Kyushu polity reached China. The Book of the later Han records the event briefly. The state of Na of Wa came to offer tribute and attend the court. Its envoy called himself a grandee, and Emperor Guangwu granted a seal and ribbon. The histories do not preserve the mission's size, departure port, or time at sea. But the diplomatic act is clear. These were not merchants who happened to reach the continent. They represented their ruler within the Han dynasty's official diplomatic system. The envoy used the title Taifu, presented tribute, and the Han court in turn recognized his ruler as a king, granting him a seal and its ribbon as symbols of that status. The 1784 discovery gave physical form to this brief record. The first character on the seal, Han, identifies the granting empire. The middle characters, Wei Nu, are generally interpreted as the state of Na among the Wa, and the final characters mean king. Japanese museum notes explain that granting seals and ribbons to foreign rulers was one way the Han dynasty incorporated neighboring polities into the emperor's diplomatic order. For Na's ruler, the seal also had practical political value. It could not give him control over the archipelago, but among the competing states of northern Kyushu, a royal title and gold seal bestowed by a powerful empire across the sea could strengthen his status. The AD 57 mission was therefore not completely isolated. After the Han established commanderies and counties on the Korean peninsula, officials, merchants, and local powers had long moved through the region. The Wa did not need to cross the entire East China Sea directly. They could travel from northern Kyushu through Tsushima and the southern Korean peninsula, then enter networks controlled by or accessible to the Han. The records of the Three Kingdoms later likewise recalled that the Wa had once consisted of more than 100 states, and that some had already attended the Chinese court during the Han period. For China, these island polities were only part of the many foreign missions on the empire's eastern margins. For early Japanese history, however, these are among the first written records with clear dates and diplomatic actions. 50 years later, the route was still active. In a D-107, the Book of the Later Han records another mission from a Wa state. It names a Wa ruler recorded as Suisho, whose envoys presented 160 shenko, literally living mouths, and requested an audience with the emperor. In Chinese histories, the term could refer to people delivered as tribute, including slaves, captives, or other dependents. Whatever their exact status, organizing a sea journey involving 160 people shows that contact between rulers in the archipelago and the continent had moved beyond occasional exchanges of goods. Half a century after the AD 57 mission, Wa rulers still considered formal relations with the Chinese dynasty worth substantial resources. By the late 2nd century, however, while China itself was moving toward the age of division that produced the Three Kingdoms, the situation in the Japanese archipelago deteriorated. Both the Book of the Later Han and the records of the Three Kingdoms preserve accounts of a great disturbance in Wa. They give no specific battlefields or number of participating states, only that the states fought one another for years and the previous political order broke down. The records of the Three Kingdoms says the Wa lands had previously been ruled by men. After the wars dragged on, the various parties jointly raised a woman as queen, Himiko of Yamatai, a polity of major importance in early Japanese history. Information obtained by Chinese envoys suggests that Himiko's authority was closely tied to religious activity. The histories say she practiced rituals the Chinese called the Way of Spirits, rarely appeared in public, and was assisted in government by her younger brother. Her residence had buildings, fences, and armed guards, while a small number of people carried her orders to the outside. The sources do not reveal Yamatai's complete institutions, but Himiko was clearly more than a religious figure. Around her was an organization for government, security, and communication, and multiple Wa polities recognized her position. This alliance did not cover the entire archipelago. The records of the Three Kingdoms states that some Wa polities did not obey her, and Himiko later fought another southern state ruled by a man. Around AD 239, Himiko again used the continental diplomatic route of earlier Wa rulers. Her envoys first reached Daifang Commandery on the Korean peninsula and were then escorted by local officials to the Cao Wei court. Wei granted her the title Queen of Wa, Friend of Wei, together with a gold seal and purple ribbon. Like the King of Na in AD 57, Himiko received more than verbal recognition. The Wei court also bestowed silk textiles, gold, swords, pearls, lead oxide, and 100 bronze mirrors. Its edict explicitly ordered that the gifts could be displayed to local people after their return to Wa. The court therefore understood that these objects would advertise the Queen's special relationship with the continental empire. After the 3rd century, the archipelago's political structure continued to change. The Yamato polity, centered in central Honshu, gradually expanded its influence. In the 5th century, Chinese histories of the southern dynasties still records several Wa kings sending missions to seek political and military titles from Chinese emperors. As ruling institutions grew more complex, however, what Japanese rulers needed from the continent also changed. Royal titles still mattered, but a state capable of collecting taxes, registering populations, managing land, organizing armies, and conducting ceremonies required more than a seal. Much new knowledge entered through the Korean peninsula. Scribes using Chinese characters, craftsmen, Buddhist scriptures, and monks crossed the sea. Japan gradually adapted Chinese writing to its own language. Buddhism brought not only religion, but also architecture, literate and translating personnel, calendars, medicine, art, and other continental knowledge. Japan's own summary of this period is straightforward. After the 7th century, the archipelago built a new state system by absorbing Chinese legal codes along with technologies and cultural goods from the continent and Korean peninsula. Under the Sui dynasty, the Japanese court began sending missions to China more actively. The Book of Sui records that envoys from Wa had reached the Sui court by around 600. The mission of 607 also brought several dozen monks wishing to study Buddhism in China. Monks and students remained on the continent, observed Chinese institutions, religious organizations, and court protocol, then carried books, knowledge, and experience home. After the Tang dynasty was established, these exchanges became more institutionalized. In 630, Japan sent its first official mission to Tang, China. Over the next 2 centuries, the court repeatedly organized large fleets carrying diplomats, students, monks, physicians, and specialists. Some stayed in Tang, China for years or decades, studying law, bureaucracy, local administration, calendars, record-keeping, and historiography. Japan now sought not simply gifts symbolizing a ruler's rank, but an entire body of state knowledge that could be selected, adapted, and rebuilt at home. This learning soon shaped Japan's political institutions. From the late 7th to early 8th century, the court formulated laws and administrative systems based on Chinese legal codes, established a central bureaucracy, and governed localities through written records. Heijō-kyō, first used in 710, clearly drew on the capital plan of Tang Chang'an. From the Han to the Sui and Tang periods, the key change in Sino-Japanese relations was therefore not the beginning of contact, but the expansion of its purpose. At first, the question was how a ruler could demonstrate status among many small states. Centuries later, it was how to build and govern a state. As Japan began systematically studying Chinese state institutions, it also began systematically writing its own past. The Kojiki was completed in 712, and in 720, the Japanese court compiled the Nihon Shoki. These works organized royal genealogies, myths and legends, and the history of early rulers into continuous narratives. The Nihon Shoki, in particular, adopted a Chinese-style historiographical form familiar from East Asian official histories, placing Japan on a timeline from remote antiquity to its own age. Japan now possessed national historical texts of its own. The problem is that both works were compiled more than 6 centuries after the 1st century AD, and more than 4 centuries after Himiko. For Japan's earliest centuries, these later domestic texts alone are insufficient. Chinese histories preserve a different body of information. The Book of Han records that the Wa people across the sea were divided into more than 100 states. The Book of the later Han preserves the mission of Na in AD 57, Suisho's mission in 107, and the later Great Disturbance in Wa. The records of the Three Kingdoms describes Himiko, Yamatai, its relations with other Wa states, and the route by which envoys traveled through the Korean peninsula to Wei. These records were only part of Chinese dynasty's broader observation of neighboring peoples. Yet they preserve state names and diplomatic events that early Japanese texts did not continuously record. When modern historical and archaeological research developed in Japan, Chinese histories did not become less important. Researchers began combining three bodies of evidence: the later Japanese Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Chinese dynastic records of the Wa, and tombs, settlements, bronze mirrors, weapons, and other remains excavated across the archipelago. None is sufficient alone. Japanese texts preserve memories of royal succession, but cannot directly answer many questions about the 1st through 3rd centuries. Chinese histories contain clear diplomatic records, but describe the Wa world from the viewpoint of continental officials. Archaeology reveals changes in population, technology, and power, but usually cannot identify a tomb occupant by the name found in written histories. The location of Yamatai illustrates the problem. Chinese histories preserve a route from the Korean peninsula to the Queen's realm, but its distances and directions cannot be mapped onto a modern map without dispute. Scholars have therefore long debated whether Yamatai lay in northern Kyushu or the Kinki region. Nor does any surviving document directly establish Himiko's relationship with the later Yamato kingship. Japanese scholars still regard comparison between the account of the Wa people in the Wei records and archaeological discoveries as a major field of research. One influential interpretation holds that Yamatai was a Chinese phonetic rendering related to the Japanese word Yamato, suggesting close connections with the early Yamato kingship, though the issue remains debated. In the late 19th century, Japan's study of its own origins changed again. After the Meiji Restoration, universities, museums, and academic institutions introduced modern European history, anthropology, linguistics, and archaeology. Researchers no longer asked only how the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki described Japanese ancestors. They also asked which regions the archipelago's populations most resembled physically, where rice agriculture and metalworking came from, why tune forms changed, and whether the Japanese descended from a population long resident in the islands or from repeated mixtures of migrants arriving in different periods. The origins of the Japanese could therefore no longer be sought only within Japan. The Korean peninsula lies across the strait from Kyushu, while the Chinese mainland had older traditions of agriculture, metallurgy, and writing. Japanese scholars compared northern and southern China, Korea, and the Japanese archipelago, and some included Southeast Asia. Many of their racial and physical classifications are outdated today, but the intellectual shift was important. Myth was no longer treated as an answer by itself, but reinterpreted alongside linguistics, archaeology, ethnology, and continental historical sources. In 1905, Kume Kunitake, a major early figure in modern Japanese historiography, published Nihon Kodaishi, a history of ancient Japan, representative of this approach. Kume tried to reinterpret Japan's earliest myths as a real history of population migration. He placed the mythological Tokoyo no Kuni, the Eternal Land, along the coasts of present-day Fujian and Guangdong, and argued that ancient populations might have reached Japan from Xiamen, Taiwan, and the Ryukyus, or from Jushan through the Korea Strait to northern Kyushu. In his model, Japan, Korea, Fujian, and the southwestern islands had once formed a common ancient demographic and political network. He wrote that coastal populations from Fujian traveled by small boats from Xiamen and Taiwan to Satsuma, and from Jushan through Iki and Tsushima to Chikushi. He also believed that southern China's tattooed peoples, including Wu Yue and Bai Yue populations, had entered Japan. He ultimately declared, Japan's ancient territory was a union of Fujian, Korea, and the southwestern islands. These views did not suddenly appear in 1905. Kume had discussed continental origins for the Japanese since the late 1880s, and by around 1895, he was already placing Japan, Korea, Fujian, Taiwan, and the southwestern islands within a single ancient maritime world. The year 1895 was also politically significant. Japan and the Qing dynasty had gone to war the previous year. When Kume restated these ideas in January 1895, The First Sino-Japanese War was still underway. 3 months later, the Treaty of Shimonoseki was signed, and Taiwan and the Penghu Islands were ceded to Japan. An academic question about Japanese origins thus coincided with Japan's emergence as an overseas empire. Kume did not simply claim that Fujian or Guangdong belonged to modern Japan, but his ancient history extended the geography of Japanese myth beyond the archipelago. Korea, Taiwan, Fujian, the Guangdong coast, and the southwestern islands became parts of a maritime world connected to the formation of the ancient Japanese state. Population migration, mythological interpretation, and ancient political geography were placed on the same map. His theory contains many inferences unacceptable today and unsupported by modern genetics. But the underlying question had changed. Japanese early history was no longer only about when the Japanese state formed, but across where the people who formed it came from. After the turn of the 20th century, the idea that Japanese ancestors came from the continent ceased to be only a historical and anthropological question. After Japan annexed Korea, theories of Japanese-Korean common ancestry were used to argue that Japanese and Koreans shared ancestors, and were later incorporated into colonial propaganda about Japan and Korea as one body. After Japan's defeat in 1945, interpretations that directly served the empire quickly lost influence, but research into population origins continued. Japanese scholars studied bones, teeth, and blood types. In 1991, anthropologist Hanihara Kazuro formally proposed the influential dual structure model. Earlier Jomon inhabitants and later migrants from the East Asian continent mixed over a long period to form the modern Japanese population. Ancient DNA technology eventually allowed this model to be tested more directly. In 2021, Science Advances published an important study. Researchers newly sequenced 12 ancient Japanese genomes, 9 from the Jomon period and 3 from the Kofun period, and analyzed them together with previously available Yayoi period ancient DNA. The results suggested that a simple two-part model of Jomon people plus Yayoi immigrants could not fully explain the modern Japanese population. The researchers proposed 3 ancestry components: Jomon-related ancestry long present in the archipelago, Northeast Asia-related ancestry entering during the Yayoi period, and an additional East Asia-related component associated with migration during state formation in the Kofun period. Continental population influx, in other words, did not happen only once between the arrival of agriculture and the rise of the Yamato state. In November 2024, a large-scale study of modern DNA provided further support for a 3-way model. Researchers analyzed genetic data from 171,287 individuals in Biobank, Japan, and compared them with 22 ancient genomes. In the model applied to the full dataset, average ancestry proportions were 12.4% Jomon-related, 21.2% Northeast Asia-related, and 66.4% East Asia-related. The 2 continent-related components therefore totaled 87.6% under this model, though these percentages are model-based ancestry estimates rather than fixed ethnic categories. The proportions also varied across Japan. Jomon-related ancestry was about 9.8% in Kinki and 26.1% in Okinawa, while a particular genetic subgroup in Hokkaido reached 31.6%. Modern Japanese populations therefore cannot be described as having developed in complete isolation within the archipelago since prehistoric times. In most populations, continent-related ancestry forms the majority, although the proportion of Jomon-related ancestry differs by region. Northeast Asia and East Asia here are genetic reference ancestries. They cannot simply be equated with any present-day ethnic group or nation. Migration routes are also becoming clearer. A study first published online in October 2024 and formally issued in 2025 sequenced the complete nuclear genome of a Yayoi period individual from Western Japan. Under a three-component model, the individual was approximately 7% Jomon-related, 67% East Asia-related, and 26% Northeast Siberian-related. Under a two-component model, using a Jomon-related population and a Korean Peninsula-related population, the estimated proportions were about 10.4% and 89.6%. Another statistical method yielded 12.9% and 87.1%. Among the non-Japanese populations used for comparison, Korean Peninsula populations were the closest. Korean Peninsula-related does not mean that a modern Korean was this individual's direct ancestor. It means that among the populations available for comparison, the continental ancestry entering Japan was genetically closest to populations associated with the Korean Peninsula. By January 2026, research had advanced another step. Scientists published complete genomes from 4 Yayoi individuals in northwestern Kyushu, who lived roughly between the 6th and 1st centuries BC. 2 retained almost entirely Jomon-related ancestry, while the other 2 showed clear continental admixture. Genetic modeling indicates that mixing between Jomon inhabitants and continental migrants in this region had begun at least about 2,500 to 2,600 years ago. This suggests that continental migration into Japan was not a sudden replacement. After migrants reached northern Kyushu through the Korean Peninsula, they coexisted, intermarried, and mixed with local populations over a long period, rather than replacing them all at once. Some communities changed rapidly, while communities with predominantly Jomon-related ancestry persisted for centuries. To investigate Na in the 1st century AD, historians of Japan must consult Chinese records. To study Himiko, the principal dates and diplomatic events still come largely from Chinese histories. When modern scholars debated Japanese origins, Kume Kunitake likewise looked toward China and Korea. This reflects both a practical problem, the scarcity of early indigenous written records, and a history in which such ideas were also exploited by imperial politics. In the age of genetics, however, the long practice of looking to the continent has proved directionally important for understanding population origins. Modern genetics has not validated Kume's Japan-Korea Fujian union, much less the imperial-era political doctrine of common ancestry. It has shown something more specific. The ancestry of modern Japanese populations cannot be explained solely within the Japanese archipelago. Much of the ancestry of today's Honshu Japanese derives from continent-related East Asian populations that entered the archipelago in multiple prehistoric and ancient migrations, with the Korean Peninsula serving as one of the most important corridors.